Folks, while the Stanley Cup Finals are ongoing, a lot of the attention seems to be focused on the Winnipeg Jets as quite a few different details are emerging about the relationship of the players' management and who might be on their way out sooner than later. We'll dive into all of that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge. And we just really love and appreciate your support. You know, we want you to always be up to date with the latest Jets news and analysis. And again, as always, we just really love that you're listening and tuning in. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And when you enter promo code LockedOnNHL, you will receive a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. Now, like I said at the top of the episode, the Jets have had some interesting things come out, most of which I wouldn't say is surprising. I think if you think about Winnipeg's relationship with its players and how the team has recently struggled and certainly lacked direction, then what I'm going to tell you is not exactly surprising. It's coming from Saravalli, Friedman, the usual sources, and some of these folks have recently had cozier relationships with the Jets. So when something leaks or comes out, there's a reasonable chance there's at least a little bit of fire where that smoke is coming from. So the big one that kind of dropped this weekend is that players and management have had a bit of a falling out. And I described it as a fight in the text to the side, but I wouldn't call it like a traditional fight, right? This is not a rebellion or a bunch of guys who are hanging the skates up and kind of throwing the towel in. There's frustration over Winnipeg's lack of going all in. And I think that this was something the Jets claimed that they were going to do at the start of this past season, but did they really do it? Look at who they signed, look at who they traded for, and tell me if you really believe the Jets went all in. If you answer honestly, the answer is no, and the players knew it too. When that trade deadline rolled around and we got Niederreiter and Nemesnikov, I think it sent a very clear message that the Jets were willing to invest somewhat, enough to at least bolster the ranks in the depth areas, but not enough to go for a top-end Timo Meier or something like that. And this is absolutely no slight to Niederreiter or Nemesnikov. They were both great for the Jets, and I think in their roles that they played, they, in some ways, even exceeded my expectations. But if you're asking the rest of the guys, you know, was that enough to really make this team a top contender, a competitive team, a truly elite squad? They will apparently all tell you no. No one seems to be happy. And one of the things that kind of came out was that the locker room relationships at least seem to be strong. Guys are on the same page. There is generally more of a consensus. It sounds like people are, you know, on good terms with one another versus the locker room being toxic the past several years. So that at least is good. But for management to now be at least taking some of the blame is interesting. We don't really see this very often where the players openly call out the front office. But for that to kind of come and hit the press tells me that the players are increasingly dissatisfied. And that follows up a remark a couple of days ago about sending a message to 81, to 44, to 17, that, you know, the Jets are still committed to competing. At first, like out of context, I was kind of like, well, I mean, okay. It is a statement that you can make to the veterans, not like anyone is really surprised by that. But if they're the ones who are partly upset about the Jets not going all in, then it kind of starts to make a little more sense. We know that Scheifele is most likely one of the guys who's kind of pissed, and why wouldn't he be? He's watched a lot of his prime essentially be wasted on a team that unfortunately really hasn't gone anywhere since the one magical cup run. You know, despite those playoff runs here and there and some freak luck where he broke his collarbone and shoulder and stuff, the reality is in the other seasons, the Jets really weren't that competitive or even that great. So, what then has Winnipeg done to really bolster the reserves? And that's all they've done is bolster the reserves, just added depth players, no elite top end talent, no one that you could arguably say is a difference maker at the highest levels. The Jets have mostly been content to kind of be in that mushy middle and hope that Hellebuyck is enough. And I think for me, that is disappointing because this team has had the opportunity to really chase after some big free agents. And every once in a while, when it comes to the trade deadline stuff, they've brought in a couple of really big names. Paul Stastny, who was it, Kevin Hayes that got misused. Players like that, legitimate difference makers in some areas. Stastny especially was really good. Hayes just never really got a fair shake with the Jets. And ultimately, we've seen him go on to be very successful for the Philadelphia Flyers. Could you imagine if he had done that for the Jets and was actually given a chance? Would have been nice. But as it is, those bridges are burned and it's all in the past now. So the Jets can only look to the future. But now that the players are kind of like, we're not going through a rebuild, we're not retooling, we don't want that. Winnipeg finds itself in a really tough spot. Thanks to alienating players and now watching a bunch of guys on expiring contracts now need to be moved, I would say that this is probably the most uncertain I've been about Winnipeg's future. I really don't know what's going to happen this offseason. I have some predictions as far as trades are concerned because guys are going to force their way out. But beyond that, I got to be honest, I have no clue what this team is up to. And they really haven't given us any indication so far as to what their plans are. The Jets have been playing it very close to the vest and really haven't shown their hand at all. So all we can do is speculate and hope that at least in some capacity, this team is preparing some sort of a plan for the future because as of right now, none of us seems to know what it is. All we're getting is drip-fed little comments and suggestions and rumors. And if you're not really into that, it's probably not making you feel any better about the team's direction. But one thing we do know for sure, the Hellebuyck train has sailed. He is on his way out. And we'll talk about why and what's next for the team and Hellebuyck in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Birddogs. Birddogs can help you feel stylish and help you look good while you're at it. And they've got Birddogs pants for every occasion. Now, the best part about Birddogs is that not only do they look great and fit great, but they've also got a liner on the inside, which is very convenient for those of you who need a pair of pants that can help you on the go and maybe even reduce the clutter of that extra bit of underwear that you probably jammed in your closet. And, they've also got great anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that can help keep you cool. So for those of you who like to get out and be active and maybe even hit the golf greens, Birddogs are a great option. They've also got summer khakis and all sorts of other styles designed to help you feel good about yourself and look good while you're at it. Be sure to go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And as I mentioned earlier, enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti style tumbler with every purchase. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode. We're diving into all of the rumors around the Jets that have recently been floating, and one of the big ones that, has seemingly emerged amidst all of the Jets players and management having a falling out is that Hellebuyck is most definitely not resigning with the Jets. And we kind of knew that, right? I think the tea leaves were very clearly saying he wants to go elsewhere. And why wouldn't he? Helly has been the anchor for this team for years, and all he's gotten to show for it is a couple of really disappointing playoff appearances and some relatively short runs. Only one run was truly great, and the Jets got stonewalled by Marc-Andre Fleury, watching them advance to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Caps, while the Jets went home sad and very depressed, realizing that might be their best chance at a cup. Seriously, if the Jets had gone against the Caps that year, I really think Winnipeg would have come out the victor. But, it is what it is. No use crying over spilled milk. Now is the time to focus on what the team does next. And the biggest thing that the Jets have to do is trade Hellebuyck. There's no other real alternative. You can't let him walk in free agency. He's not going to extend. Let him go to a team where he can make a difference. Now, some of the stuff that has come out is really annoying because the Jets have basically said they're not really interested in trading in the Western Conference. And I hate this thinking because barring like the Vegas Golden Knights, who I don't want to do business with for a personal that and the Calgary Flames on a personal level because I hate those teams. There's just no real reason not to trade in conference, right? If the LA Kings want Hellebuyck and are willing to pay top dollar for his services, just send him to LA. Seriously, there's no problem in letting the Kings get an elite goalie, even if it's just for one season. What's the worst that's going to happen to the Jets? They might face LA and lose a couple of games like they've already done this past year. Who cares? It's just a couple of games. The assets that you are leaving on the table if you trade only with the Eastern Conference are immense, especially a team like LA. They have futures for days. They could give the Jets whatever it is Winnipeg probably wants. And with Hellebuyck, he's not going to just be any old rental. He'll be a pretty elite starter in net for them. So I would imagine that they'd be willing to give him a reasonably big contract offer and also give the Jets a reasonably big trade offer. Stop messing around and just go for it. Like, I get it. You know, you don't want to help like a Central Division rival necessarily. And I understand why teams still think about this stuff. But I think for where the Jets are in their stage of their development and process, the next 2 years, frankly, don't matter. It doesn't really impact the Jets if any of these teams really gets better because Winnipeg is not at the level where they can even afford to think about that. They're just not that good. And I think that's going to be a consistent theme going forward is that the Jets are just going to be mediocre. Unless they have a really big offseason where suddenly the players that they bring back in trade have killer seasons and really push this team forward, I just don't see a scenario where trading Hellebuyck really shakes up their season performance, in terms of, I would say, like making other teams really strong and putting the Jets behind the eight ball. Winnipeg's already going to be behind the eight ball, just moving Hellebuyck, period. So why bother caring about other teams in your conference if your own performance is probably going to tank anyways? Just deal with it and accept the losses because you know that the assets that you get back, especially big players or futures that can really help you down the road, that's what you want to focus on. But the Jets, again, keep saying, we don't want to trade for futures. We want to have players who can help us now. The Kings might still have some guys that can do that. And I think probably more so than other teams. If you really want to go towards the Eastern Conference, I guess you can do New Jersey. The Devils have plenty of great assets as well. I would say that they are one of the biggest options, I would say, for the man in net that, the Jets would also receive pretty fair compensation. Buffalo to a lesser extent, but I think if you're trading Hellebuyck, it's probably to the Devils. I think that they have some really fantastic prospects that Winnipeg could most certainly use. Again, I just don't want the Jets to limit themselves and take teams off the board that could give them pretty big offers. I think Hellebuyck's going to be one of the most sought after deadline or not deadline summer like trade acquisitions. I really feel like he is the difference maker in that so many teams desperately need. And, even if it's just for a season, you could still get some insane value out of him if you trade for him. So for the Jets, they cannot screw this up. This is a trade that they simply cannot screw up. They have to get this right. And I think limiting yourself only to the Eastern Conference would be making a massive mistake right off the bat. So Winnipeg, get your crap together. Don't mess this up. This is one of the most important trades in franchise history. You have got to get every last dollar out of this because of the tremendous loss that we're about to experience watching Hellebuyck walk to another team. I'm still not emotionally prepared for it. I'm still very upset that this is happening. I was prepared to give Hellebuyck a blank check going forward, but no easy days for Jets fans, I'm afraid. I think we are in for bumpy rides. But let me know what conference team you want the Jets to go to. Is it someone in the West or the East? Drop your trade picks below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a little bit, we're going to dive into one more topic and talk about how the Knights are now just one game away from becoming Stanley Cup champions and why that should probably be frustrating to the rest of the NHL. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet of up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. FanDuel is awesome because they make betting on sports very fast, very easy, and very secure. And they've also got great promotions every day, all sorts of little contests and things that you can join. FanDuel wants to keep you involved and looped in the whole way through, and it doesn't matter what sport you're into, whether it's soccer, basketball, even the baseball season, hockey right now, they've got it all. And of course, when you win, you get paid instantly. Who does not love instant gratification? I know I do. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet of up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are just wrapping up really quickly talking about how the Vegas Golden Knights are now one game away from becoming Stanley Cup champions, and for the rest of the NHL, that's probably a little bit annoying. We all know that, Vegas, as far as having, the typical first few years experience in the NHL, Vegas really has had the best of all of it. I mean, they really haven't missed many playoff runs. I think just one so far, right? And they had a Stanley Cup Finals of their first season. They have another one right now, and they're up 3-1 against the Florida Panthers. Everything just seems to be coming up Vegas. I mean, their fan base is getting to enjoy tons of playoff success, repeated playoff appearances. The first 6 years have been among the best ranking, I would say, for any sort of expansion franchise that we've seen. And it all came from some, I would say, mistakes made with the rule sets initially, but also teams just weren't very smart. I mean, giving Vegas Marchessault and Smith right off the bat as cap dumps, and then watching them become first-line talents for several seasons, that's not great for the Panthers, and they're about to watch them, potentially sink their Stanley Cup ambitions immediately. And then you've got, Mark Stone coming in, who's been a game-changing force, Shea Theodore, who's become instrumental on that blue line. They drafted Nick Hag, who's become a minute-munching monster for them. In net, they have Adin Hill, who's done as much of a decent job as you could possibly ask a guy who, quite frankly, was a cast-off from the Arizona Coyotes organization. Wasn't really making any headway, didn't even look like he was going to be all that special in his time with the Knights, and now here he is as the last remaining goaltender of their whole pool that they've had to pull from, and he's doing pretty darn well. And so I think for me, what Vegas has shown is how being aggressive in the trade market, making, for the most part, pretty smart moves, and not really worrying about tons of drafting prospects and stuff when you have an existing core can really pay off. Obviously, Vegas long-term is going to have some issues, right? Especially as their roster ages out. But they've shown that, when it comes to prospects and draft picks, they're still just lottery tickets, and other teams overvalue that stuff. So rather than pissing around the bush and waiting for stuff to develop, just go for it. If you have a team already existing, that's really good. And I think that is one of the biggest differences between Vegas and Winnipeg. Winnipeg has generally been very conservative in the trade market and really hasn't done a lot to improve the roster on a consistent basis. Vegas is like, just throw the chips in and go for the top end talent available. I think that approach has paid dividends very clearly. They're about to win a Stanley Cup in their first several years of existence. You really can't say that their plan has gone poorly. They've used every loophole that they've had to, all completely legal and all, relatively sanctioned, I suppose. I guess more power to them. If they're going to play the game and play it well, you really can't be upset at them for doing whatever it takes to win. It's not like they're really cheating, and they've done a good job of building a team that is consistently competitive. They found guys who can fit their roster and work alongside top-tier talents like Mark Stone. Chandler Stevenson was basically a nobody before he got to Vegas, and now thanks to Stone's rise to prominence, Stevenson fits perfectly with him. Stone has elevated Stevenson's game to a level that I don't think anyone ever expected. And sure, apart from Mark Stone, Stevenson probably is not going to put anywhere near these kinds of numbers up. But with this team built how it is, he works with Stone. So, yeah, I mean, this Vegas team, they're built deep, they're strong, they're fast, they're everything that you want in a team. They're exciting to watch. And it is frustrating to watch other teams having wasted decades doing nothing while a young expansion franchise has come in and basically blown the doors off. But it really should be a tale to other GMs of what being aggressive in the market and really making the most of every opportunity you have can do for your team and fan base. So Winnipeg, I hope you're taking notes. Let's have a better next season than we did this year. For now, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Be sure to return tomorrow for more fresh Jets offseason content and maybe even some predictions on next season. All of that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. But for tonight, I thank you so much for making the time to listen to us. We appreciate your support. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets, go.